As authors and publishers, we are incredibly mindful of the royalties we are supposed to be receiving, but what happens if we are not paid properly? Let's take a look at KDP's terms of service and break this down with a lawyer.
My name is Tony Iliakostas. I'm an adjunct professor of entertainment law and IP at New York Law School, and I have an Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok account called The IP Professor that is dedicated to all things intellectual property.
Tony, let's talk a little bit about how to dispute KDP if they are not paying royalties properly to an author. This is a question that comes up a lot, and we know that they have directly spoken about this inside of their terms of service in 2 different clauses. So what do we need to know?
Well, first off, as I was telling Cam before we started recording, this screams unilateral clauses. This is just as poorly worded that is not in favor of the user as possible. But here you are, you have to end up using KDP. You have to agree to these terms, unfortunately. So first off, I want to point out this specific clause we have on screen, 5.4.7, which says that you cannot bring any suit or other legal proceeding with regard to any statement unless you bring it within 6 months after the date of statement is available. So they're making basically very clear, they're almost creating like their own quasi little statute of limitations, if you will, of when you could bring an action or when you can't bring an action related to non-payment of royalties, of fees, whatever it is. The part that I love the most, though, is that they say that your sole remedy will be the recovery of those monies with no interest. So you can't even get interest on this. That's the part that's kind of crazy to me. Either way, this is, I think, a little bit too... if I'm speaking from your opinion, I think that this is a little bit too disadvantageous for the author, only because I think on one hand, what KDP is trying to assert here is that if they don't pay, God forbid, because of like some issue with accounting or whatever happens, they're trying to basically take the position that they're not going to assume liability. And this is their way of curing a potential breach of contract. In this situation, I just don't see a world where any reasonable person, especially if you're having negotiation between one party and another party, if there would be any sort of agreeing to this type of terminology, I just think that that's a little bit unfair. But the part that obviously I want to touch on is about how you cannot bring a suit or a legal proceeding, because a little later on in the contract, in the terms of KDP's terms, they have this whole lengthy lingo about arbitrations, about disputes, and what you can and cannot do. And very briefly, it basically says that if there was any dispute that comes out of this agreement, or KDP did something wrong, or if you did something wrong, you can't go to court. You have to go to arbitration. And not that arbitration is bad, but the problem with arbitration is that you're dealing with basically another practitioner who is acting as like the quasi-judge. You're actually not going before a jury. You're not even going before a judge. This independent person operates as an arbiter, as the mediator between both parties in trying to seek a resolution. This is your classic conflict resolution protocol that does happen all across the board here in the US. But if you have something that is rises to the level of being and feeling and acting like a breach of contract claim, I don't think if you were to poll 100 people, I don't think any single person would think that the arbitration is the way to go when you're dealing with a breach of contract claim. But, again, this is a unilateral term that you're agreeing to. So, of course, they're going to have arbitration. But then if you go all the way down, you're agreeing to the fact that you need to do an arbitration. I love this part. Again, it screams unilateral terms. You and we each waive any right to a jury trial, and you and we agree that any such suit may only proceed in state or federal court in King County. I'm going to guarantee you that there will never be a world where KDP, Amazon will ever want to go to court. It's not worth it. They're going to look at it as an expense of legal resources that they could spend on something else. Arbitration is much more cost effective. But then that leads to the whole fact that you're not really in a court. So it doesn't have that same oomph to it that going to court has. But the fact that you waive a jury trial, and so do they, that obviously is something that is a bit alarming. So if you're the kind of person that likes to be a bit litigious, especially if you're seeking non-payment of dues or any other dispute related to a breach of contract or a breach of the terms, I think this is your proof positive that you really do have to read each and every clause in any terms and conditions, not specific to KDP, but any one, because you may not realize that you're agreeing blindly to terms of this sort and with language that for the most part, is pretty prohibitive to the user. This is what you would explicitly be agreeing to. So, unfortunately, this is not the best type of clause, in my opinion. But nonetheless, this is exactly what KDP has prescribed in their terms and conditions.
So let's say someone is dealing with them not paying properly. What would then be the next steps or good things for them to be doing to make sure they're legally protected?
The first thing you got to do is go to your lawyer. If no ifs, ands, or buts there. Go to your lawyer, laying out all the information, having them help you create or map together this timeline of non-payment. That's going to be very essential, because now, if it does need to rise to the level of going to an arbitration, at least your lawyer is going to be pretty much ready to go and can argue anything and everything to the mediator. Also, a lawyer may, especially with the type of lawyer that may have experience with arbitrations, they may have a frame of mind of how to choose the right arbiter. They may want someone that is truly acting in a very neutral fashion and not, working in favor of KDP, and also in the same way not in favor of the KDP user. But a lawyer is going to be a very important part of that process, having all of that information laid out and ready to go. If it does rise to the level of arbitration, that would be especially helpful. Obviously, one other thing that a lot of lawyers like to do is mitigate. That is the name of the game when we're talking about anything legal in nature. This is not specific to arbitrations. This is specific to even if someone was a victim of copyright infringement and they want to pursue a copyright infringement claim. You don't jump the gun necessarily with buying an index number and then filing a lawsuit in federal court. You started off by sending a cease and desist, by sending out correspondence saying, hey, we noticed that you use such and such content. We want to seek a remedy before this escalates any further. That is the prototype of mitigation. And I would expect something similar would take place in a situation like this, where a lawyer contacts KDP and says, hey, listen, we noticed that our client wasn't paid within this specific window of time. What are you going to do? And if it rises to the level of KDP not honoring their end of the bargain and paying in an appropriate fashion, that's when the mitigation now phases into litigation, which unfortunately it's not quite litigation, this arbitration, but quasi-litigation nonetheless.
So with that in mind, if you have questions on how this works, go ahead and drop those down below. Tony's coming back for upcoming episodes, and we're breaking down even more of the clauses inside of the terms of service on KDP. So if there's one you want us to cover, now is the time to let us know, or drop those questions down below for the upcoming episodes. And as always, you can reach out to Tony on his social media. Tony, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at The IP Professor. You can check out my entertainment law podcast called Unseen. New episodes drop every Friday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
If you have questions, let's go ahead and drop it down below. And if you have other terms of service you want to go over from KDP or any of the other book distributors and printers, go ahead and let us know. Tony's coming back for upcoming episodes as we continue to help you every single day navigate the world of writing, publishing, and marketing to make this your most profitable year ever. We'll see you in the upcoming episodes.